Troy A. McGill. Troy McGill was a 28-year-old sergeant in the U.S. Army's 1st Cavalry Division during World War II, serving on Los Negros Island in the Admiralty Islands campaign in February 1944. His unit had landed on the island and was moving through dense jungle when Japanese forces launched a sudden, massive night attack. The moon was barely out, the trees thick, and the ground was rough with roots and fallen branches. Visibility was almost nothing, and the sounds of gunfire, grenades, and shouted orders echoed all around. McGill's squad was quickly wiped out or forced to scatter. Alone, he realized the enemy was advancing straight toward a position where wounded soldiers and retreating comrades were trapped. He didn't wait for orders. He stepped into the open and met the attack head-on. Using a combination of his rifle and hand-to-hand combat, he fought wave after wave of attackers, holding them back long enough for the survivors to escape deeper into the jungle. The Japanese were relentless, pressing forward in waves, and McGill's ammunition was running low. Still, he didn't falter. Witnesses later said he charged at them multiple times, throwing grenades, firing his rifle, and even engaging with bayonets in close combat. He killed dozens and slowed the enemy advance for hours. Eventually, he was mortally wounded, but his stand had allowed many of his fellow soldiers to survive the ambush. When the battle ended, his comrades described his courage as unreal. One man later said, "We lived because he stayed." For his extraordinary bravery and sacrifice, Troy A. McGill was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor, which is the United States' highest military award for valor. Yuichi Sugiyama. Yuichi Sugiyama was a Japanese medic in World War II, trained to save the wounded long before he ever learned how to fire a weapon. He served on a small Pacific island where it was hot and humid, and the visibility was so bad because of the dense jungle and drifting smoke from gunfire and explosions. On October 7, 1944, his unit was being pushed back by a major American assault. Machine gun fire was cutting through the jungle in long, hard bursts, and wounded soldiers were calling out from shallow bomb craters scattered across the ground. When Sugiyama spotted one of his friends screaming for help, he didn't hesitate. He sprinted out into the open, slid down beside him, and immediately started working, checking his breathing, pressing down on the bleeding, and trying to calm him enough to keep him conscious. But while he was bent over the man, a burst of gunfire ripped through the branches and struck Sugiyama in the stomach and shoulder, knocking him down. Even while bleeding heavily, he kept trying to treat the wounded man. His hands were shaking, but he was still moving. Meanwhile, the enemy was closing in fast, and the line around him was collapsing. Sugiyama knew the wounded behind him had no one left to protect them, so he reached over a fallen soldier, grabbed the machine gun lying next to him, braced it against the edge of the crater, and pulled the trigger. Men later said he held off the attackers long enough for the survivors to drag the wounded deeper into the trees, ultimately saving several soldiers' lives. When the fighting finally died down, Sugiyama was found slumped beside his friend he had tried to save with his medical bag still lying open in the dirt. He was later awarded the Order of the Golden Kite, which is Japan's military award for bravery in combat during World War II. Alexander Matrosov. Alexander Matrosov was a 19-year-old infantryman in the Soviet Union during World War II. On February 27, 1943, his unit was attacking a heavily defended German position near the village of Chernushki. The snow on the ground was frozen solid, crunching under every step, and the air was sharp and cold. German machine guns were cutting through the trenches, firing so fast and so close that the men couldn't even lift their heads without risking a shot. Every time someone tried to move forward, they fell, pinned down by the relentless bullets. Matrosov's squad was almost stopped entirely because they couldn't advance. More men were falling every minute. The enemy's position was a small firing slit in a wall of logs, which was extremely deadly. From 30 feet away, Matrosov could see the enemy gunners leaning over, firing down the line. He knew that if no one moved, the attack would fail and more of his comrades would die. Without hesitation, he ran. There was no cover, only open snow and machine gun fire. Bullets flew past him, knocking snow into the air, but he kept going. When he reached the slit, he threw himself on it, pressing his body flat against the wood and dirt. The gun jammed against his chest, and the shooting stopped in that small spot. His squad didn't hesitate. They ran forward, firing as they went, capturing the position. Sadly, Matrosov died instantly with his body covering the machine gun, but his action saved dozens of his comrades' lives. Soldiers later said they could not have taken the position without him. Because of his sacrifice, he was posthumously awarded the Hero of the Soviet Union, which is the highest honor for bravery in the Soviet Army. Nikolai Sirotinin. Nikolai Sirotinin was an 18-year-old Soviet gunner in July 1941 during the opening weeks of Operation Barbarossa, which by the way to this day still stands as the largest military invasion ever. His unit had been pushed back, and they were retreating near the town of Krychev while German tanks were pushing through. The morning was foggy and wet, and the fields around the road were soaked from overnight rain. The Germans were moving fast. There were dozens of tanks and armored vehicles, followed by infantry trucks completely crushing his unit. Knowing someone had to do something, Sirotinin stayed behind with a single 45mm anti-tank gun, while the rest of his unit pulled back. He wasn't even ordered to stay, he volunteered. He set up the gun in a tall grass field, hidden just enough so that the Germans didn't see him at first. When the first tank passed by, he timed his shot carefully and fired. The shell hit perfectly, blowing the track off and blocking the entire road. The second tank moved up to help. He hit that one too. Suddenly, the whole column was stuck, and no one knew where the shots were coming from. German infantry started spreading out, firing into the fields, searching for him, but Sirotinin just kept loading and firing. Tank crews tried to push the wrecks off the road, but every time someone stepped out, he hit them. He fought completely alone for almost 2 hours. By the time the Germans finally found his position, he had fired off dozens of shells and stopped the entire armored column from advancing. When German soldiers reached his ditch, they found him dead next to the gun. Even the German commander wrote in his diary later that they buried him with full honors because of how fiercely he fought. His actions gave his own unit precious time to escape and regroup, saving countless lives. He was later honored in the Soviet Union for his bravery. William H. Pitsenbarger. Though this did not take place in World War II, his bravery is still definitely worth the mention. William Pitsenbarger was born in 1944 and grew up in the quiet town of Piqua, Ohio, not far from Dayton. By his junior year of high school, he actually tried to enlist in the U.S. Army to become a Green Beret. But because he was underage, his parents refused to sign the papers, forcing him to finish school first. After graduating, he didn't waste any time. On New Year's Eve in 1962, while most people were out celebrating, he was sitting on a cold train headed south to San Antonio to start basic training with the U.S. Air Force. About 4 years later, on April 11, 1966, William rode in a rescue helicopter toward a patch of jungle about 30 miles east of Saigon. Down below, an entire army unit of about 130 men had walked straight into a massive ambush. He could hear the gunfire even from the air and see smoke pushing up through the canopy. The jungle floor was so thick with brush that the helicopter couldn't land, so Pitts clipped himself onto the hoist cable and let them lower him straight down into the war zone. When he hit the ground, he didn't crouch or wait. He immediately ran to the nearest wounded soldiers he could see. He checked for a pulse, packed wounds with whatever he had, and dragged the men where the survivors were trying to hold a perimeter. The distance wasn't far, but under fire it felt like miles. The helicopter came back for him twice, but both times he waved them off. He wasn't even supposed to be there. Pararescue medics weren't meant to fight on the ground, but he refused to leave until the wounded were taken care of. He moved constantly, checking to see who was alive and who needed immediate help. He pulled men behind fallen logs and kept telling the guys who were fading, "Stay awake, stay with me." At one point, the enemy pushed in so close that he dropped the medical bag, picked up a rifle off a dead soldier, and started firing from behind a tree just to buy the wounded a few seconds to move. He held his position for hours. Pitts kept working until he was eventually hit. Even then, soldiers said he stayed propped up on one elbow, still trying to point out where the fire was coming from so others could avoid it. When his body was recovered the next morning, he was found with a rifle in one hand and a medical kit in the other. When the battle finally ended, the 9 men who survived later said the exact same thing. "We lived because he stayed," the exact words used for Troy A. McGill, who we talked about earlier. And just like Troy, William H. Pitsenbarger was awarded the Medal of Honor, along with the Air Force Cross, Purple Heart, Airman's Medal, National Defense Service Medal, and Vietnam Service Medal. Lakhiman Gurung. Lakhiman Gurung was a 19-year-old Gurkha soldier serving with the British Indian Army during World War II, which was one of the largest volunteer forces in the Allied war effort. On May 12, 1945, his unit was stationed on a hill in Burma, guarding a strategic position when a massive Japanese assault began. The sun was blazing overhead, the jungle around them dense and humid, and the rocky hillside offered little cover. The Japanese attacked in waves, shouting and firing relentlessly, trying to break through the defenses. During the assault, Gurung managed to throw back 2 incoming grenades. However, a third grenade exploded in his right hand, shattering the bones, severing his fingers, and inflicting severe facial and eye injuries. Most men would have retreated, but Gurung refused. He propped himself up behind a small mound of earth and continued to fight, loading and firing his rifle with his left hand only. Each wave of attackers that came closer was met with his fierce resistance. He even threw back grenades when he could, all while encouraging the men around him to hold the line. Hours passed, and the Japanese continued to press, but Gurung never let the enemy advance past his position. By the end of the assault, his extraordinary stand had saved his fellow soldiers from being overrun, giving his unit the chance to regroup and hold the hill. Exhausted, bleeding, and in terrible pain, he finally collapsed. Despite the permanent damage to his hand and eye, Lakhiman survived. For his actions, he was awarded the Victoria Cross, which was the highest honor for gallantry in the British and Commonwealth forces. If you liked this video, subscribe for more content.